Today you ask them and you get no hands. Nobody knows. And then I went and took it a step further and I told them the artist and I said, okay, so how many people know the song? And I got 5 hands. 2.5% of the students knew the song. So what does it mean? It means that this is no longer a mass audience. They're getting their music through iTunes recommendations, Amazon recommendations, through friend recommendations on Facebook, ilike.com, all these different services. And that means it's no longer getting it through mass media like the radio. And so they're working in sort of a network environment, not a hierarchy, not a mass market sort of situation. And the sort of calling card of each one of these is very different. For the network, it's all about participation. It's not about authority. It's not about following along. And here's what's interesting about this. Now you think about the environment that they're in, and they're in an environment that's approaching this ubiquitous networks, ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous information, a limited speed, about everything everywhere from anywhere on all kinds of devices. And here they are sitting in this environment, and we're still pitching them these old tests that are saying, like, can you recall this information? Meanwhile, they could text chacha.com, or they could open up Google, and they could get any of those answers, just draw it right out of the air. And so I asked the students then how many do not actually like school, and this probably won't surprise you, but over half of them rose their hands. So they're spending a lot of money on school, but they actually don't like it. And then I changed up the question a little bit, and I said, how many do not like learning? And I got no hands. So this is a really bad situation where we've created this institution of learning that nobody likes. We did a little bit more with this, and I asked them to sort of confess to me what they're doing in class, and we got a whole bunch of responses, like they Facebook through their class, they bring their laptop to class, but they're not working on class stuff, they buy $100 textbooks they never open, they pay for class but don't show up. We did a survey and we found that they complete 49% of the readings that were assigned to them, and this is across the curriculum, not just in my class. And furthermore, they found that they thought that only 26% of that was relevant to their life. And that means, of course, if they don't think it's relevant, they're not going to be learning anything from it. So this is a quote from 1967 that I thought really captured the moment of today as well. It says, "Today's child is bewildered when he enters the 19th century environment that still characterizes the educational establishment, where information is scarce but ordered and structured by fragmented classified patterns, subjects, and schedules." So this is Marshall McLuhan, 1967. What's interesting about this is that teaching has still not changed, but learning has. And we know learning has because students learn what they do. And if you pay attention to what they're doing, where they're learning to read and write and all these things, this is the survey that we did to find out about these things. We found that they'll read about 8 books this year, but also 2,300 web pages and about 1,200 Facebook profiles. So this is where they're learning to read, right? We found that they would write about 42 pages for class this semester, and they'll groan about every minute of it. But they'll also write over 500 pages of email. We found that they spend about 3.5 hours a day online, 1.5 hours a day watching TV, 2.5 hours listening to music, 2 hours on the cell phone, 3 hours in class, 7 hours of sleeping. And it's a total of 26.5 hours a day. and of course, we know that because they're all multitaskers, and they have to be. Now, here's what's really interesting. If students learn what they do, and we know that's true, then what are they learning when they're sitting in a big room like this? And so we actually brainstormed this together, me and the students in this class. And we thought, well, the first thing is that to learn is to acquire information, because you're sitting there just sort of waiting for your head to be filled with information. That information is scarce and hard to find. That's why you have to come to this big room and have the information dumped on you. You should trust authority for good information, namely the authority on the stage in the front of the room. That authorized information is beyond discussion. You'll notice that these chairs are fixed. They can't even turn to one another to talk about this. So it's not a room designed for discussion or anything like that. So the ultimate blow here is that it's about obeying the authority and following along. Now, what's really bothersome about this is if you pay attention to the questions they're asking, if you think about the hallmark of learning, it all starts with a good question. A good question can lead somebody on a lifelong journey of learning. But the questions they're asking here are things like this. How many points is this worth? How long does this paper need to be? And what do we need to know for this test? Which are actually all limits to learning. They're actually asking you to tell them, how much do I need to learn? Because I don't want to learn too much, And those are really devastating questions to hear as a teacher. And I sort of think of this as the crisis of significance. It's where students are sort of grasping and trying to find the meaning and relevance in their education. They're not finding it. They think it's just a game, getting the high score and things like that. And meanwhile, there's something in the air, literally something in the air. It's floating all around them, and it's only been there for the last 10 years or so. And it happens to be virtually the entire body of human knowledge is actually floating in the air all around them as we lecture to them. And it seems to me that that means that we should change up a little bit about how we're lecturing to them. This entire mediascape is actually floating in the air all around them. We know this because they're Facebooking in it. And they could be doing something else in it. We could be engaging them in a different way. What's really interesting about this information floating all around the room is that it completely annihilates all these assumptions about information. This idea that information is scarce, certainly out the door. We know that's not true. The idea of trusting authority for good information, we now have Wikipedia as a good example of this. And not only that, but what's interesting about Wikipedia is that next point, that authorized information is beyond discussion. What authorizes the information on Wikipedia for me is the discussion. The fact that I can actually click on another tab and I can see the discussion that's going on about that information. I can verify that information by people's arguments that they're making, which are all transparent and they're available for me to see. So this idea of obeying the authority and following along, all of that is out. And therefore, this top idea, the idea that to learn is to acquire information, also needs to be reconsidered. And we all know this, and we're going to be learning a lot about learning in the next few years as we really start to grasp what all this means. But in the immediate, I'll just say that we're certainly going to start to figure out that learning is about sharing information effectively, discussing information, critiquing information, creating information, and not just creating information, but actually creating meaningful connections between all of this massive information that's now upon us. That's what learning is really all about. It's about those meaningful connections. It's ultimately creating that significance that our students are lacking. And so the question then becomes, the question that guides us as educators has to be, how can we create this significance? How can we create meaningful connections? And most importantly, how can we create students who can create meaningful connections? Now, this is a part of talk you might expect me to lay down the answers about how we can create students who can create meaningful connections, but I don't think that's the answer. I think the question itself is the solution, and I think all of us together have a part in answering that question, and that's the fun of it. The moment we stop asking this question, we'll be in a dark age. So let's like savor the question and love the question and let it guide us forward. Thank you.